There comes a moment in a man's life when the noise dies down, when excuses stop working, when pride can no longer protect him from the truth. That moment is when he finally understands what he lost. And once a man reaches that point, he doesn't beg, he doesn't explain, he comes back prepared. See, the thing about loss is it doesn't knock on the door politely. It kicks it in. It takes what matters most and leaves you alone with your thoughts. No applause. No second chances in that moment. Just silence and the truth staring back at you. At first, he blamed everyone else, the timing, the pressure, the world. But blame gets heavy after a while, and one day he got tired of carrying it. Loss doesn't arrive as a lesson. It arrives as damage. It doesn't explain itself, doesn't soften the blow, doesn't wait for you to be ready. One day everything feels stable, routine, familiar, almost permanent, and the next day something vital is missing, not misplaced, not delayed, gone. And in that absence, confusion takes over before understanding ever shows up. People like to talk about growth as something positive, something inspiring. But real growth begins with discomfort. Loss forces you to feel what you avoided when things were easy. It drags you into a reality you didn't plan for, and it demands your attention whether you're prepared or not. At first, loss feels unfair. The mind searches for reasons that protect the ego: bad timing, outside interference, misunderstandings, bad luck. Anything that keeps responsibility at a safe distance. That's the natural reaction, because accepting loss means accepting involvement. It means admitting that choices were made, moments were ignored, warnings were overlooked. Loss exposes the gap between what was valued in words and what was valued in action. And that realization doesn't come gently. It stings because it removes the comfort of denial and replaces it with clarity. Clarity doesn't ask permission. It confronts. Loss also has a way of slowing time down. Nights become longer. Silence becomes louder. The distractions that once filled the day suddenly feel empty and ineffective. This is where loss begins its real work. In the quiet moments, the mind replays conversations, decisions, missed chances. Not to punish, but to reveal patterns. Patterns of neglect. Patterns of complacency. Patterns of assuming there would always be another opportunity. Loss shows you exactly where effort stopped and entitlement began. It points out the moments when appreciation was replaced by expectation and attention was replaced by comfort. Unlike success, loss cannot be negotiated with. Success can lie to you. It can make you believe you're doing everything right when you're only getting away with doing just enough. Success applauds outcomes but ignores foundations. Loss does the opposite. It strips away results and forces you to examine the structure underneath. It teaches you that consistency matters more than intensity, and presence matters more than intention. Loss doesn't care what you meant to do. It only reflects what you actually did. That's why its lessons last longer. They are etched into memory through experience, not theory. Over time, loss reshapes priorities. Things that once seemed urgent lose their importance, and things that were taken for granted suddenly carry weight. The hunger changes, the focus sharpens. You begin to understand that value isn't proven by possession, but by maintenance. That what matters most requires attention before it demands regret. Loss teaches patience because rushing didn't save anything. It teaches humility because confidence alone wasn't enough. And it teaches respect for time, for people, for moments, because nothing is guaranteed to stay simply because it once belonged to you. Pride doesn't announce itself as a weakness. It disguises itself as confidence, self-respect, even strength. It convinces a person that standing firm is the same as standing right. In the early stages, pride feels protective. It shields the ego from embarrassment, shields the identity from doubt. But over time, that same shield becomes a barrier. Growth requires exposure, and pride refuses to be exposed. It locks the doors to self-examination and throws away the key, insisting that nothing inside needs to change. That's how pride delays progress, not by stopping movement completely, but by keeping it moving in circles. Pride thrives on being correct, not on becoming better. It encourages defending past decisions instead of evaluating them. When mistakes surface, pride rushes in to reframe them as misunderstandings or necessary risks. It shifts blame outward because accepting fault feels like surrender. But growth is not surrender, it's adjustment. Pride doesn't understand that distinction. To pride, admitting error feels like losing status, losing control, losing identity. So instead of learning, a person doubles down. They repeat the same behaviors, convinced that consistency alone will eventually produce different results. One of pride's most dangerous qualities is its resistance to listening. Advice sounds like criticism. Feedback feels like an attack. Warnings are dismissed as negativity. Pride convinces a person that experience alone makes them immune to correction. But experience without reflection hardens into arrogance. Growth requires humility, the willingness to say, I don't have this figured out yet. Pride refuses that sentence. It replaces it with excuses, justifications, and silence. And in that silence, opportunities for improvement pass by unnoticed. Pride also isolates. It builds invisible walls between a person and the people who care enough to be honest. When someone points out a flaw, pride interprets it as disrespect. When someone expresses concern, pride hears doubt. Over time, those voices stop speaking, not because they were wrong, but because they were ignored. Pride calls this independence, but it's actually loneliness in disguise. Growth often comes through others, through perspective, challenge, and accountability. Pride rejects all three, choosing comfort over correction. Eventually, pride creates a delayed reckoning. It postpones growth until circumstances force humility. What could have been learned through reflection must now be learned through consequence. Relationships strain, opportunities disappear, the gap between potential and reality widens, and only then does pride weaken, not because it wants to, but because it can no longer sustain the illusion of control. Growth finally begins, not at the moment pride is challenged, but at the moment it is exhausted. Silence is often misunderstood as weakness, retreat, or defeat. People assume that if someone isn't speaking, explaining, or defending themselves, they must have lost confidence. But real silence isn't empty. It's deliberate. It's the space where noise is removed and truth becomes audible. Change rarely begins in public. It starts away from opinions, away from applause, away from the need to be understood. Silence creates distance from distraction, and that distance allows clarity to surface without interference. In silence, there is nowhere to hide. Without constant conversation, the mind turns inward. It begins to confront questions that were postponed for too long. Why did this happen? What patterns led here? What was ignored? Silence forces self-interrogation, and unlike external criticism, it cannot be dismissed as bias or misunderstanding. The answers come slowly, sometimes uncomfortably, but they are honest. Silence removes the pressure to perform and replaces it with the responsibility to reflect. Silence also breaks the habit of reacting. When words are withheld, emotions settle. Anger loses its fuel. Defensiveness fades. What remains is observation. In that state, a person begins to see situations as they are, not as they felt in the moment. Silence allows perspective to replace impulse. It teaches restraint, the ability to pause instead of respond, to think instead of react. That restraint becomes the foundation for wiser decisions moving forward. Change requires consistency, and silence supports that process. Loud transformation seeks validation. Quiet transformation seeks alignment. In silence, routines are built without announcement. Discipline forms without recognition. Progress happens without witnesses. This is where habits are reshaped and priorities are reorganized. Silence protects the process from interference, from opinions that could derail focus, and from praise that could inflate ego too soon. It creates a controlled environment where growth can mature naturally. Over time, silence strengthens identity. When approval is removed, a person learns who they are without external reinforcement. Confidence becomes internal rather than performative. Decisions are guided by principle instead of reaction. Silence doesn't mean disengagement from the world. It means engagement with purpose. It marks the transition from chaos to intention, from noise-driven behavior to deliberate action. This is where change takes root, unseen but undeniable. Accountability is often mistaken for punishment, as if taking responsibility automatically means accepting shame. In reality, accountability is control reclaimed. The moment a person stops blaming circumstances, people, or timing, they regain authority over their own direction. Blame gives temporary relief, but it leaves the future unchanged. Accountability, on the other hand, creates leverage. It turns mistakes into instruction and failure into information. When responsibility is owned fully, nothing is left outside to manage. You deal only with what you can change. True accountability begins without an audience. It doesn't seek sympathy or validation. It starts with an honest assessment of choices, patterns, and behaviors. This level of honesty is uncomfortable because it removes excuses. It forces acknowledgement of where effort was inconsistent, where boundaries were weak, and where discipline was absent. Accountability doesn't soften these truths, but it also doesn't exaggerate them. It simply states facts and demands response. That demand is where strength is built. Accountability also eliminates fear. When someone accepts full responsibility, there is nothing left to defend. Mistakes no longer threaten identity because they are no longer denied. This creates freedom, the freedom to learn openly, to adapt quickly, and to move forward without carrying unresolved guilt. Accountability transforms error into experience. It replaces shame with strategy. Instead of asking who caused the problem, the focus shifts to how the solution will be built. In relationships, accountability rebuilds trust. Words alone cannot repair damage, but consistent responsibility can. Accountability shows up through changed behavior, not explanations. It proves growth through action rather than promises. When someone stops justifying and starts adjusting, their presence changes. People sense reliability not in perfection, but in ownership. Accountability creates stability because it signals that mistakes will be addressed, not avoided. Over time, accountability sharpens leadership over self first, then others. A person who holds themselves accountable no longer waits for external pressure to improve. Standards become internal. Discipline becomes habitual. Progress becomes intentional. Accountability is power because it places outcomes back where they belong, in the hands of the one willing to take responsibility for them. Motivation is emotional. It rises and falls with mood, energy, and circumstance. One day it's strong, the next day it disappears without warning. Relying on motivation means relying on something unstable to carry long-term responsibility. Discipline is different. Discipline operates regardless of feeling. It doesn't ask whether the moment is comfortable or convenient. It acts because the decision has already been made. Where motivation starts the journey, discipline is what ensures it continues when enthusiasm fades. Discipline is built in repetition, not inspiration. It is formed in ordinary moments that don't feel important at the time. Showing up when there is no excitement. Practicing when no one is watching. Choosing consistency over intensity. These small, controlled actions compound into reliability. Discipline trains the mind to follow structure instead of impulse. Over time, it removes the internal debate about whether to act. The question shifts from, do I feel like it, to what is required. That shift is where progress becomes predictable. When discipline replaces motivation, focus becomes clearer. Energy is no longer wasted on starting and stopping. The mind settles into routine, and routine creates efficiency. There is less resistance, less procrastination, less emotional negotiation. Discipline simplifies life by reducing choice. The path is already defined, so execution becomes automatic. This clarity allows effort to be directed toward improvement rather than hesitation. Discipline also creates resilience. Motivation struggles under pressure, discipline adapts to it. When setbacks occur, discipline doesn't interpret them as signals to quit. It treats them as part of the process. This mindset removes drama from difficulty. Challenges become expected, not feared. Discipline keeps movement steady even when progress feels slow, and that steadiness outlasts temporary discomfort. Over time, discipline reshapes identity. Actions repeated daily turn into habits, and habits form character. A disciplined person doesn't rely on external encouragement to stay aligned with their goals. They trust their systems more than their emotions. Discipline becomes a quiet form of self-respect, proof that commitment is not dependent on mood, but anchored in decision. When he comes back, it isn't loud. There's no announcement, no explanation, no need to be seen. The return doesn't look like it used to because he isn't the same person who left. Before, there was urgency, something to prove, something to win, something to defend. Now, there is intention. The return is calculated, measured, and grounded in awareness. He understands that rushing is what caused the loss in the first place. So he moves with patience, not because he lacks confidence, but because he has learned the cost of carelessness. The difference is visible in how he carries himself. There is less tension, less performance. He no longer seeks validation from reactions or outcomes. His focus is inward, on alignment, consistency, and control. He has already confronted his failures in private, already paid the emotional price of reflection. By the time he returns, there is no need to argue his growth. It exists regardless of who acknowledges it. The return isn't fueled by regret, but by clarity. He knows exactly what matters now, and just as importantly, what doesn't. This return is also selective. He no longer chases everything that once caught his attention. Access is limited. Energy is protected. Where he once overextended, he now sets boundaries. Where he once assumed permanence, he now practices appreciation. The return isn't about reclaiming everything. It's about reclaiming what aligns. He understands that presence is more valuable than proximity, and commitment is more important than familiarity. The return is intentional because he knows that repeating old patterns would only recreate old outcomes. There is also a deeper sense of responsibility in the return. He no longer expects things to sustain themselves. He understands maintenance now, daily effort, consistent care, and awareness of small changes before they become large problems. He listens more than he speaks. He observes before he acts. The return is not about control over others, but control over self. That self-mastery changes how he responds to pressure, conflict, and uncertainty. He is no longer reactive. He is prepared. The return carries weight because it is backed by work, not promises, not words, not emotion, but discipline applied over time. He shows up differently because he trained himself differently. The mistakes that once defined him now inform him. The losses that once weakened him now sharpen his judgment. The return is steady, not dramatic. It is quiet, but unmistakable. It signals a shift from wanting to be recognized to being reliable, from needing to be right to choosing to be effective. And so this isn't about redemption in the way people like to imagine it. There are no grand gestures here, no speeches meant to erase the past. What's done has already taught its lesson. This is about awareness earned the hard way, about respect rebuilt through consistency, about understanding that what was once lost cannot be reclaimed the same way. It must be earned differently. He's not coming back to demand a place. He's coming back prepared to hold it. Because when a man has been broken down by loss, humbled by truth, shaped by silence, strengthened by accountability, and disciplined beyond emotion, he no longer asks for chances. He becomes worthy of them.